My name is Michael A. Rathel, and I'm a senior systems analyst at Westat, an employee-owned contract research organization with headquarters in beautiful Rockville, Maryland. I'm the author of 5 books on SaaS software, more than 35 SaaS technical papers, over 200 SaaS technical blogs. I'd like to thank you for joining me for this presentation. The presentation is, of course, using SaaS to download files from Amazon Web Services S3. Well, there's a lot of talk these days about the cloud in general and cloud computing in particular. And when we talk about cloud computing, there's really basically 3 different areas of cloud computing. Software as a service, SaaS, not to be confused with SAS, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. And if you're not familiar with those, let's pause and go through them just for a moment. The old model, if you can see, as you can see in this graphic, down on the left-hand side, the old model was that everything was done on premises. So you had a data center down in the bowels of your organization in the sub-basement somewhere, and on premises, your organization was responsible for applications, data, runtime, middleware, the operating system, virtualization, servers, storage, and networking. We're all familiar with that. Now, infrastructure as a service replaces some of that because others manage it. It's done in the cloud. So for the model of infrastructure as a service, the applications, the data, the runtime, the middleware, and the operating system is still done down in the basement of your data center. However, virtualization, the servers themselves, the storage and networking is done in the cloud by a cloud provider. Platform as a service does a lot more, is managed by somebody else in the cloud. So your organization is only on the hook for the applications and the data, and everything else is done in the cloud. And then finally, you have software as a service where nothing is on premises. It's all done in the cloud. Now, that may be a little bit hard to keep, to visualize, but I love this graphic because it puts it in terms of pizza as a service. And since I love pizza in general, this really spoke to me. So anyway, basically, you have the same model. So you have traditional on-premises, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So made at home pizza, you're responsible for the dining room table, the soda, the electricity, the gas, the oven, fire if you have it, pizza dough, tomato sauce, toppings, and cheese. Infrastructure as a service is if you go to the store and buy your pizza. So you're responsible for the top things, the dining room table, the soda, the electric and gas, the oven and fire. But the pizza dough, the tomato sauce, the toppings and cheese is all done for you. It's managed by someone else. Platform as a service in terms of pizza, you're only responsible for the dining room table and the soda. The pizza is actually delivered to you. And then finally, software as a service is if you go out to your favorite pizza restaurant and you sit down, everything is done by somebody else. It's managed by somebody else. Well, the top cloud providers these days are VMware, IBM Cloud, Google Cloud Platform, Amazon Cloud, Alibaba Cloud, and Azure, which is the Microsoft offering. And as of the last quarter of 2021, this is where they stood as far as the leaders in cloud offerings, with Amazon Web Services being the top, then Microsoft's Azure, Google Cloud, Alibaba, etc. The thing is, with Amazon Web Services, who has 33% of the market, they have all sorts of offerings. They have compute offerings in the cloud, network analytics, developer tools, management tools, security and identity, storage and content delivery, application services, mobile services, database, Internet of Things, and enterprise applications. Now, if you look at this graphic, in the bottom left-hand side, you go up to the second row, you can see S3. And that's basically where we're going to be in this presentation. So S3 is Amazon Web Services Simple Storage Services. That's the 3 for the S3. And it's basically a cloud-based object storage system. So you can store analytics data, log files, application data, videos and pictures, backup and archives. You can store programs, and you can store these in the cloud in simple storage services. And they're stored in things called buckets, and that's why you see the bucket there in that middle graphic. And when it's stored in the cloud and you have your objects stored in simple storage services, you can control access to that data. You can optimize the cost with different storage classes so that you can archive data for long term and have a longer period of time that it's recalled back, or you can have immediate access to it. You can replicate it across multiple cloud data centers, access it on premises with your virtual private cloud, protect and secure your data, and then they say gain visibility. And of course, with other Amazon products, web services products, you can analyze your data. Now, the thing is, some months ago, actually towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, I was contacted by a West App project that was storing objects in Amazon Web Services S3. They had hundreds of PDF files in an S3 bucket, and they needed to download these PDF files to a network directory. And they had a specific, like a .text file, which had the names of those files that they wanted to be downloaded. And they wanted an automated method of downloading the files. So they plan to have files downloaded weekly, and the list of files, the .txt file containing the list of files, would also be updated weekly. So I looked around, and much to my delight, I saw that in base SAS, there was a procedure called proc S3, the S3 procedure. The proc S3 allows you to do 12 different things with Amazon Web Services S3 buckets. You could so there's different commands: create to create an S3 bucket, copy to copy an S3 location object to a destination S3 location, delete to delete an S3 object or location, destroy to delete an S3 bucket, get to retrieve an S3 object to a SaaS client machine. That's exactly what I was looking for. Get dir to retrieve the contents of an S3 directory, info to print information about an S3 location, list to print contents of an S3 location, make dir to create a directory in an S3 location, put to do just the opposite, to copy files or a directory from a SaaS client machine to an S3 location, put dir to copy a directory from a SaaS client machine to an S3 location, and rm dir to delete a directory from an S3 location. Just about anything you want to do with S3, you can do in SAS. So I created the proc S3 get files macro program. And that program requires 6 parameters. Key ID is going to be the access key ID for the S3 service. Region, the region name for the S3 service. Secret, the secret access key for the S3 service. Bucket, the name of the AWS bucket folder that the objects are residing in. Outdir, the full path name of the directory where the objects are to be downloaded. They're going from S3 into that directory. File list, the full path name of the flat file containing the names of the objects to be downloaded. And in that file, there's going to be 1 object per line. Now, those first 3 things, key ID, region, and secret, you're going to need to get from your AWS, your cloud administrator. That person is going to give you this very private information. And that information is a lot like having password information if you're thinking about a relational database. And then, of course, bucket, that's where the objects are going to reside, and you're going to need that information. This is what it looks like, the actual call to the program. You can see I specify key ID, region, secret, bucket, the output directory, where the files are going to be downloaded, and in the text file that has the list of objects to download from S3 into our network directory. So I like to segment my SAS programs into parts, which do functionally different things. And the rest of this presentation, I'm going to go over that SAS program. Part 1 is file allocations, very simple. Part 2, build the S3 get statements and execute proc S3 to download the objects. Part 3, prepare the data for reports. Part 4, to create the report file. And then I'm going to spend a moment talking about how you can operationalize the proc S3 get files macro program in your own organization, and in some concluding remarks. Part 1 is file allocations. So we start off by allocating the file containing a list of objects to be retrieved. So we have file name, the file ref is file list, and ampersand file list is going to resolve to the macro parameter file list that we passed in. Obtain the name of the input flat file because we're going to use it as part of the output PDF report file name. So we have %let input file name, and we're going to scan file list, and we're going to go backwards and grab the name of the input text file. And you're going to see how that's important in about 10 or 12 slides. And then we're going to allocate a temporary file to use to store the S3 statements that this program builds. So we say file name, get statements, temp. And that's actually going to create a temporary area in memory that we're going to be writing the proc S3 statements to. And so this is what the file is, the input file, S3 files to download.txt. And within that file, you can see that we're going to be downloading from S3 1, 2, 3, 4 different files. One's a PDF, one's an Excel file, one's a SAS data set, and the other one is a text file. So part 2 is the most important part of this. It's going to be build the S3 get statements and execute proc S3 to download the objects from the Amazon Web Services into a directory in our data center. So we have a data step. We're creating a data set build gets, and the only thing we're going to keep in build gets is object name. So we have in file list. Length equals line length, n equals EOF. We have n equals EOF because when we read the last row from that flat file, we're going to want to do something. So, and of course, object name is the file ref for the flat file. We have length of outcode for 250, specifying that length, and then we're saying that the file we're going to write out to in the file statement is the file ref for that is get statements, and that's that temporary file I told you we're going to be creating. And then finally, the last statement we have here is quote equals, and then a double quotes. I like to do that because I create a variable called quote with double quotes in it because it helps me when I'm quoting kind of a complicated string, and you'll see it used in the very next slide. So if underscore n underscore equals 1, if it's the first time that first row that we're reading, we want to create the proc S3 statement and write it out to the temporary file. So you can see that outcode, that long line that we're going to build, which you can actually see down there at the bottom, is going to be the concatenation of the words proc S3 key ID equals, and then a double quote, key ID, which we passed in as a macro parameter, another quote, a space, region equals, another quote, ampersand region ID, which was another parameter that we needed to pass in. And you can see we do the same with secret and then unquoted. And all of this creates that line that you can see down at the bottom. Proc S3 key ID equals, and then the value region equals secret. And that's going to be loaded into that temporary data set. Now that we've done that, we need to address each one of the lines that we're reading in from that flat file. And we do this a similar type of thing. Outcode equals get, quote, ampersand bucket, the name of the bucket name, and we're going to strip the object name so that there's no spaces before or after it. And then quotes and some other stuff. Outdir is the output directory, and then the object name. So we're going to point where it's coming from. And you can see that there are forward slashes for the bucket, and then, of course, backwards slashes for where we're going to store it on our network directory. So it's going to build that line that you can see down there, and again, store it into that flat file. And then finally, if EOF, we've read the last line in the flat file, then we want to put a run statement out there. You can see we have the code for doing that. Now that we've built a proc S3 command as well as all of the different lines to it, including the run, we %include that file, and it's going to actually execute it. So this is what it looks like. Remember, we have this temporary data set called get statements. And now at the end, having executed this program, this is what's stored in it, what you see in the center there, a perfectly formed execution of proc S3 with the key ID, region, and secret, all of the get statements for us to grab the files from S3, where they're going to go on the network, and then finally the run statement. And when we execute that percent get statements, then it actually executes proc S3, and those files are downloaded. So now that we've done that, we've done the action verb, it's time for us to prepare the data for reporting. We need to know how successful or not we've been. So this is what we're going to do. Perform the dir command on the output directory and pipe the results. So we have file name, objects, pipe, and then we do the dir/b, which means a brief directory listing of the output directory. And so that's on the file name. And then we have a data step. Read the names of the objects stored in the output directory. So we have data output dir files, and we have a length statement. And in file objects, line equals line length, and input object name $varying line length. So when we execute that input file, it's going to kick off the file name statement up above, and it's going to pipe in, execute the dir command, and then pipe them one by one into the data step, the names of the files that are in that output directory. We're going to, after we do that, we're going to sort by object name. And then remember the original data set that we created, build gets, which where we were reading the flat file and storing all the name of the objects that we wanted to get. We're going to sort that also by object name. Now you can guess ahead what's coming next. When you sort two files by the same variable name, what are you going to do? You're going to merge. And indeed, that's what we do. So we're going to merge the files that we wanted to get from S3 in that flat file against the files that exist in the output directory. We're going to merge those names together and create possibly three data sets. Matching files, the ones that we asked to be downloaded and were downloaded. Build gets only, some that we asked to be downloaded but were not downloaded. They're not found in the output directory. And then files that were only in the output directory and were not in the original flat file of files that we wanted to have downloaded. So we do our merge, and you can see if A and B, then they're matching files. If A and not B, then it's build gets only. It was only in the list of files we wanted to have downloaded, and for some reason they were not found in S3. And then finally, if B and not A, then output files only. So now that we've done all of that, let's create the reports and for ourselves or our users. And we do, basically, we have the ODS sandwich, ODS PDF file equals, and then you can see down at the bottom, ODS PDF close. But file equals &outdir, and we passed in the full path to the output directory. And the file that we're creating, the PDF file, is going to be called S3 file transfer report for files listed in an ampersand input file name. Now remember, way back at the beginning, we grabbed the name of the input file. So that way we can, if we're doing this for multiple flat files, we can actually see the which file this report is for. And then we're just going to do some straight old proc prints. Proc print, data equals matching files, and you can see files successfully downloaded from S3. Proc print, data equals build gets only, and then the variables and title and footnote. And also in the footnote, you can see that we specify the input file containing files to be downloaded was, and then the S3 bucket specified was. So we do that so we're as instructive as possible so that somebody looking at this report in the future can know what's what. And this is what it looks like. This is the actual physical file created there. S3 file transfer report for files listed in S3 files to be downloaded. So that was the input file. S3 files to be downloaded.txt was the input file. So these are files successfully downloaded from S3, and we can see that we did successfully download 1, 2, 3. But wait a minute, we had specified 4 files to be downloaded. That's not good. And the next report, files listed in the input file that were not downloaded. So readme.txt was not found up there in our S3 bucket. I'll have to look into that. And then these were files that were already existing in a target directory that were not in the input list file. Okay, that's good to know. Good to know. Well, that's it for the program. Let's talk about operationalizing the proc S3 get files macro program. So what you can do is copy the proc S3 get files macro program into a SAS program on your computer and save it in your AutoCall macro library or save it in a directory of your choosing. If you don't put it in one of your AutoCall macro libraries, then there's a second program called execute proc S3 get files macro program, and you can download that. And that has a %include. So you would fill in the %include to where you've saved the macro program. And then, of course, you fill out all the various parameters and you can execute it. And again, this is what that would look like. Here, we're %including it, and we've stored the program on our iDrive in corporate macros proc S3 get files macro program.sas. And then to execute it, once we %included it, you can see that we have a %get S3 files. And we've specified key ID, region, secret, bucket, the output directory, and then the flat file, S3 files to download.txt, where the files are. All right, so this presentation introduced the proc S3 get files macro program. It can be used to get objects from an AWS S3 bucket and write them to a network directory. Programmers need this information in advance. You need the key ID, which is the access key ID for the S3 service, the region name for the S3 service, the secret access key for the S3 service, bucket, the name of the AWS bucket folder the objects reside in, and then, of course, a list of files to be downloaded. So you may be thinking, well, Michael, what about that project? How did that turn out? Well, the project successfully used this program, the proc S3 get files macro program. They downloaded 3,004 files, and the files were about 1.5 megabytes each. And there was a total of 4.1 gigabytes that they ultimately downloaded, transferred from an S3 bucket down to a project drive. And it took 26 minutes to run. And they were very, very happy with the program. So, of course, in researching this, there's a number, I found a number of good papers and a number of good references out there. These are the top ones. Your data is in Amazon Web Services. How do you access it with SAS? Very, very good paper. I would definitely recommend that. Using SAS Proc S3 to access Amazon S3, Proc S3 statement documentation, and then Amazon Simple Storage Services documentation. So check all of those out to get more of a global feel for SAS and how you can use it with Amazon Web Services. The usual disclaimer that the contents of this paper are the work of the author, who is me, and do not necessarily represent the opinions, recommendations, or practices of WESTAT, and then the other disclaimers. Well, you can't really, since this is a recording, you can't really ask me any questions, but I'd be more than happy to share additional information or answer any questions if you contact me via email. And my email is michaelrathel@westat.com. And that's it for this presentation. And I want to wish you best of luck in all your SAS endeavors. Bye-bye.